all my talks are in memory of my parents who saved me and brought me to America in 1941. In the upper left-hand corner is my late father, of blessed memory, Rabbi Maurice Klein. In the lower right-hand corner and over on the left is my late mother, Sarah Klein, who shepherded us with her wisdom as a strong female throughout Eastern Europe to my safety. In the middle is my brother, the Honorable late federal judge Ted Klein of southeastern United States, who was only a baby when we left Slovakia and went on our route of 8 months in hiding. I will never forget, young as I was, the night the Hungarian trained police banged on our family door on Shabbat in 1940 and grabbed my father by his elbows, Rabbi Maurice Klein, to a Hungarian Nazi-run forced labor camp, Sarasputak. How could I forget that night, 2 years after Kristallnacht? How could I forget my mother screaming and suddenly hiding me in a closet? Why, I asked. Why, Mama, did this happen? Why was Dad taken, and why do I have to hide? Because we are Jews, said my mother. And that was my first introduction and confrontation with anti-Semitism. Then, I will never forget, in November 1940, when my father, looking gaunt and worn, rushed in the door and said that he had escaped the camp and that we had to immediately leave Košice, Slovakia. He said, Sarah, we have to run, we have to hide, we have to go, because if we're caught, I will be sent to my death. He, as other Orthodox Jews in that camp, had already learned as early as 1940 through a network of information that ultimately Jews would be taken throughout Eastern Europe to ghettos and camps and most likely to death. Thus began the journey we were to take alone as a small family unit, my mother, Sarah, my father, Maurice, my original name, Marika. At that time, I was only 5 years old, and our new infant baby brother, Tibor, who was 9 months old. What a harrowing journey we had in front of us. 7 months through countries on foot and train. Our goal was to reach Lisbon, Portugal, where there were ships waiting, sponsored by the Hayas, the Hebrew Immigration Society in New York, to take Jews to safety, if one could make it to Lisbon with all the challenges of the journey. What I hope you take away from this talk is the answer to the oft question, why didn't the Jews leave earlier, as though it were that easy? And you will discover the challenges now that those of us who did try to leave, what we had to go through. I will also never forget my mother taking me to her twin sister, Lily, my Aunt Lily, and begging her to come with her husband and 2 small children. And I will also never forget hearing her say to my mother, "What, are you crazy? What will happen to me staying right here will happen to you on the road. Nope, I'm staying." And there is the answer to the question, why didn't the Jews leave? As the scholar Dr. Michael Birnbaum says, and I quote, "The pessimists left and the optimists stayed, and they were murdered." We left without them, I have never seen, nor heard, nor found my Aunt Lily again. And my mother spent her life screaming with nightmares for her twin sister, Lily, who we are certain now died with the last transport of Hungarian Jews in Auschwitz. And so we left Košice, Slovakia. We had passenger reservations to board a very famous ship that you can look up later called the Nyasa. It was due to Lisbon, Portugal, on April 15, 1941. So we had to be in Lisbon by that date. Now, follow the timeline. We're talking about leaving in December 1940. We had to be in Lisbon to catch the ship that we had reservations for through an aunt who was in America, in Chicago, who had made those reservations. There was plenty of time. However, as we were rushing and running to make the deadline of our visa entry papers into Lisbon, Portugal, they expired on January 18th, 1941, due to train delays and many more unexpected events. We missed the deadline by 2 days. Thus, we arrived on the border town of Badajoz, Spain, on January 20th, 1941, and we found ourselves hopelessly and frustratingly stopped in our journey. The border guards in Spain often sent Jews back to their countries. They were very anti-Semitic. However, they were easily bribed. And so my father took the last of his money and he bribed them to let us stay in a hotel in Spain until we could figure a way either to get into Lisbon or go back to Slovakia. While in the Hotel Nacional in Badajoz, Spain, my father met a very sympathetic non-Nazi German tourist who helped my dad dictate a letter to the Jewish community of Lisbon. I read you a piece of that letter. We are a Jewish family from Hungary, Czechoslovakia, on the way to the United States, trying to escape Hitler and to freedom. Unfortunately, our Portuguese visa ran only till the 18th of January, and because of train delays, which have consumed days, we only arrived here on the 20th in this border city, and I cannot proceed any further. We are here with 2 small children, a 5-year-old girl and a baby boy of 10 months. The children suffer from hunger. We are used to hunger, but it is tragic to see how it affects my innocent children. I want to tell you that when I first found these papers about 20 years ago, I cannot tell you the emotion as a grown-up now of reading how my parents felt worried so much that I and my baby brother were going to starve. It was I'm an English teacher, so it was an interesting point of view feeling. Hence, if it is possible, please help your Jewish brothers, because this situation is really tragic. We are not even in the situation to pay for the hotel because my money is gone. We have money in a Lisbon bank, but we can't get to the bank in Lisbon. Please, my Jewish brothers, attempt to help me. The other thing I want to tell you is I knew right away that my dad did not write this, that it was dictated by the German, because that would not have been Hence and my father's language. Anyhow, it appears from the chronology of this letter that we were indeed soon allowed to enter Lisbon. The Lisbon community, of which there were many Jewish people, did help So now it is February 15th, 1941. We finally arrived in Lisbon on that date, after running throughout Eastern Europe, always one step ahead of the Nazi occupation. Note, we went through Hungary, Yugoslavia, Italy, France, and Spain. A young couple, my parents were only 33, schlepping and dragging a 5-year-old and carrying a baby. We had been on the road for 3 months, and as previously mentioned, the Nyasa ship was leaving on April 15th. So we had time to make the ship, now for which we had verified passage, just not the entire paid ticket, which we discovered was at that time $1,000. In addition, now we had one more serious problem. Our visa entry papers to the United States were due to expire on March 13th, 1941. So what were we to do? I don't know how many of you have been to Lisbon. I know Portugal is a great destination now, so you can visualize what I'm going to tell you. We were put in a tourist hotel on the outskirts of Portugal. For me, as a child, my memories are of much anxiety, much fear, and insecurity, listening to my parents speaking in Yiddish and Hungarian about what would become of us. The government officials, according to one testimony I read, were wanting to put all of us Jews, refugees, in prison. But the local Jewish community leaders of Lisbon, small as they were in numbers, there were about 1,500 Jews then at that time, prevailed, and they convinced the authorities to place us instead in small hotels and pensions. I remember my mom and dad every day going into Lisbon, leaving me as a 5-year-old to watch the baby Tibor, to wait in line with other Jewish refugees at consul and HIAS offices to get the visas. But as we watched from the shoreline, the Nyasa left without us because the new visa entry papers had not arrived on time. Finally, on May 15th, we boarded a ship called the Ciudad de Seville. The HIAS had arranged this passage. It was a huge passenger cargo liner that I very well remember, always afraid I was going to fall off the ship. And it was one of the last few ships to leave Lisbon, Portugal, carrying Jews to safety in 1941. Had it just been 6 months later, January 1942, the final solution was planned to murder all the Jews of Europe. We had made it just in time. I quote from my mother's memories and from a book written by Gloria Goldreich. Quote, "The dangers that lay ahead from the moment we left Lisbon and boarded the ship assaulted the passengers from the first day at sea. Rumors circulated that there was a shortage of drinking water, and passengers panicked as distraught mothers worried about their small children. The ship could not sail a direct course because the German Navy had turned the Atlantic Ocean into a maritime battlefield. Submarines lurked beneath rising and falling waves, stalking freighters and passenger ships. The seas turned turbulent, and the ship plowed through storms, heaving dangerously from side to side." I do remember that very well. Many were sick from the turbulence, and when the storm subsided and the sea was calm, the observant Jews were on the deck, as my father was, putting on their talit, their prayer shawls, and praying to God to get us to safety, after all we had been through, just not to die on the ship and to be thrown into the ocean. My mother was terrified, and she did not let me out of her sight. All this I very well remember. Finally, our family realized we were in New York. We had arrived safely in America. So what became of the Klein family left behind? Of the 15,000 Jews of Kassel, my hometown, 12,000 were immediately gassed upon their arrival on a transport in 1944 in Auschwitz. By the way, that was the same train that Elie Wiesel was on. 300 Jews returned to Košice immediately after the war, among them 6 of the Klein family, who all ultimately immigrated to Israel, Bolivia, and the United States. But we never heard from Aunt Lily or her 2 small girls, my cousins, my age, again. Gone. To the fires of Auschwitz, we presume. As I sit before you now, I am the only one left of this little family of 4 who ran, hid, and escaped the Holocaust. I'm still standing, still talking, still teaching. Why have I been spared in these last years of deep losses? I do not know, but I must only assume it is to tell you the story so that then you will never forget and pass it on when I can no longer do it. I once heard a refugee Holocaust survivor child say, "The experience of my parents is woven through the fabric of my soul, and I am compelled to tell it to the world." Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm honored. Thank you. So let me show you some of the images. Yad Vashem was so intrigued by my story because one of the staff members there has twin children that she put together this PowerPoint for me, and we decided to call it The Power of Perseverance When Families Escape from the Holocaust. That's the twins, and we also call it The Fate of the Two Sisters. There is the debarkation card that I found through Hayas of the day that we arrived in America. And there's the twin sisters. That was me, the last picture taken of me before we left Europe in Košice. And here are pictures of Jewish life in Košice before the Nazis occupied. And I did go back, and I did find Kabachka Street, where I used to live. And there's the last picture taken of my mom and Tibor and myself before we left Europe. And there's our route of escape. And then again, here's another map of the route to safety. And here's our visas and our passport and the way we looked when we finally arrived. This is the letter that the Hayas found for me that the German German guy dictated to my dad. My dad wrote it in his handwriting, but that's the original letter. Here's all the paperwork you needed to get out of Europe. It's sort of the same of immigrants who are trying to get to America today. It was not easy to leave. So when we say the Jews knew what was happening, why didn't they do something? It was not, you saw what we had to go through. There's the ship. This is my favorite document because they don't know how old I am. So my daughter always says, "Ma, it says maybe 7, maybe 6, maybe 5, maybe 1936. Why don't you just make yourself a year younger?" So depending on my mood, sometimes I say I'm 86, sometimes I say I'm 85, sometimes I say I'm 87, but I can't seem to go any lower than that. That is the, if you've been to Lisbon, how many of you have been to Lisbon? That is the building where my parents lined up every day to try to get the next ship out, or Jews lined up every day. And then this is Kasha, Košice, whichever way you want to call it, point of deportations when that last train came and took all the 15,000 Jews of Košice to Auschwitz, except for the Klein family. My grandpa, my grandma, my uncles, my aunts were hiding in the ghetto in an attic, and the Nazis did not get them. So after the train left to Auschwitz, the Klein family, my grandpa, my grandma, they all came down, and there's nobody there. But they had Christian neighbors that had told them that if they ever needed help to come there, and the neighbors hid them until it was all clear and the war was over. And then here are the Jews of Košice at the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Every Jew from Košice was immediately gassed because it was near the end of the war. Here's the Jewish immigration from to Lisbon during the war. And this is a very old picture of me that Yad Vashem put together with the famous quote, "He who saves one soul, it's as though he saved an entire world." We often wonder if our children of survivors are paying attention. And after my mother died, a year later, I got this email from my son David, who's now an attorney in Jacksonville. And I was so surprised because I didn't think that he had been listening or paying attention. There's so much packed in there that I just didn't realize. First of all, that he recognized the strength of a woman, that it was my mother who kept us going, her hope. I do admit, though, that at one point, my mother told me before she died that she was ready to give away me and my brother in Lisbon, because if they were going to be sent back or in that hotel, that she knew the Jews were ultimately going to be murdered, and that she wanted to leave me and my brother safe. And I remember looking at her and I said, how could you have thought of doing that? I would never have wanted to not grow up and be your daughter. And that's another dilemma that particularly I see so many of you young people here, when you have these discussions on the Holocaust, choiceless choices, as scholar Lauren Slanger calls it. What kind of choices did those who were in these predicaments make? It's called choiceless choices. I'm particularly thankful, first of all, that you're all here. I did not expect more than 5 people, really. I'm particularly thankful to see the young people, and that you care so much that you even stood and gave me, because those of us who were child survivors, we're the last generation. We waited our time to tell our stories out of respect for the older generation, the ones who were in the camps, who were in Auschwitz, who almost were in the gas chambers. We felt that we survived Let them be the ones. Now they're gone. And so the child survivors of the world, of which there's about 3,000 to 4,000 of us, we're coming out and we're speaking, but we're also now, as you can see, have our challenges. We're getting older, we're getting tired, many don't want to speak anymore. So we need to have the story carried on, and thank God we have these wonderful young people that are here that can do that. And finally, I want to tell you that one of my legacies that I'm very proud of is that I was instrumental in starting what we call Miami 3G. Is there a Miami 3G person here? So what's 3G? 2G is adult children of the Holocaust survivors. How many 2Gs do we have here? No? Oh, okay. And then 3G is the adult grandchildren who have now taken up the torch. They are in their early 40s, mid-40s, late 40s. There's a 3G group in almost every major city. There's a New York 3G, and now we have a Miami 3G. I started it during the pandemic on Zoom, and it has grown to 65 members. They've even recently hired an executive director. So yes, the story will be carried on, and it's just never going to happen again to the Jewish people. That's all there is to it.
The Rohr Jewish Learning Institute has the largest collection of Jewish media online. Hit subscribe for more.